The idea is that isn't just the people at the top that have truth anymore. That everyone has truth with a small t. That my experience as a young person is almost as valuable as someone older with experience. Where it used to be that there was a hierarchy and the people at the top would tell you, but now what we see is that young people go, well, that's just not true. It's just not true. That you don't hold the truth. There's a decline in the power of hierarchy. Again, we talk about knowledge becoming out of date much more rapidly in the past because we're looking at knowledge doubling every couple of years versus every 50 years back in the Middle Ages. So it's changing, the world's changing. And a thought of sense of things beyond science and analysis. There's limits to science, and we see more of a growth of a sense of spirituality and a sense of purpose that is different. So we're looking at something beyond science and that. So some of the elements, so this is the practical, useful part, hopefully. First one is the decline of metanarratives. A metanarrative is just a big explanation. So communism is a metanarrative. That in its day, it explained all of human history as class struggle. There was the thesis, the antitheistic, the dialectic that the bourgeoisie would be overthrown by the proletariat. Did I get that right? There was running dog capitalists, that's you guys, that would be run off by the freedom of the yoke being thrown off by the proletariat. So when we look at that, we can laugh about it because communism has somewhat failed, or at least in China, morphed into Chinese capitalist, communist capitalists. And there are communists that are really good at capitalism, which leaves us confused in buying Chinese things. So it's intriguing that that's happened. So what we look at here is that meta-narratives, that is, the big explanations of history are falling by the wayside. So after the fall of the Berlin Wall, there was a certain amount of Anglo-American triumphalism that we said to the communists, we won, you lost. Western Europe has been in relative low growth for a long time. Japan was cratering at the time. China was still communist and not too much of an economy. So we said to the world, you should be like us. We lectured the world. And I have quotes from Carter and Clinton and Robert Reich, his Treasury Secretary, saying that. And we look back at it, it was kind of a nice time in history. We had one. But the world went on, and it shows that actually there's a bipolar world, Moscow and Washington, then it was Washington, now it's Washington and Beijing and maybe New Delhi. And the world's going in a different direction. And they're not like us in terms of their economy. The Chinese, the Indians, the Gulf are taking different approaches. And you know what? They're pretty successful. There's much we can learn from them. And they can learn from us, I hope, as well, but we can learn a lot from them. So it's something the meta-narratives of capitalism have scattered out to a number of stories, not one dominant story. Now it's interesting because actually from a business viewpoint, a couple of key imperatives out there now are innovation. We need more innovation than in the past is absolutely something important. Emergent Strategy is one of Henry Mintzberg's ideas. He taught in our master's program yesterday, so it's fresh on my mind. One of his great contributions from the school is the idea that strategy emerges from, not from the clever McKinsey report or the senior people going away for a weekend. It goes from the executives being out in the field with customers, with employees, with scientists in the lab, and having conversations. And the job of the manager, senior manager, increasingly is recognizing innovation from others, not you, and providing resources for it, and supporting the ones which are better. So the job of the manager is not to have the ideas, but to support them. That is saying that innovation comes from everywhere, not just from the center, not just from the top of the pyramid, not just from the old people. It comes from throughout the organization. So this fits with the business need. So a manager, a leader now, must spend more time listening and looking for others' ideas and empowering them than merely trying to be the great strategist. Now, we've heard this for a while, but I think it seems more compelling today than in the past. It's just more true It used to be that global firms would have a head office in a country, and that's where ideas would come from. But we're looking at probably the main advantage of being a global multinational is you're getting ideas and innovation from all over the world rather than from one place. The importance of emotions. So a third idea here is that what we recognize that emotions are more and more part of the conversation. Now, when I worked at IBM, and I was in plans and controls for a while in head office, I just shudder to think I was in plans and controls in Toronto head office for Canada. I was an evil person in some senses looking back. It was just, what a horrific thing that was. And when I remember meetings, if anybody got emotional, we'd stop the meeting and have coffee. If anybody got emotional. It was all about spreadsheets, and back then it was plastic overheads and things like that. It was all about numbers. And, show me the metrics, show me the numbers. But the thought is, that's a passé view, that people now want to be engaged at work. They want, now this might be to some degree, many more women being in the workforce. Now that's a stereotype, but if I argue that women are sometimes more in touch with their emotions than men, I don't know if anybody would argue too violently with that. But that may be why it is, but the thought is that the Academy of Management, 8,000 people every year go to the business professor and doctoral student conference. There's hundreds of presentations about emotions now. It's a huge area of interest in work because we see that emotions are how you get the great energy out of people. A renewed need for purpose. What people are looking for, particularly young people, but the boomers are getting there as well. A sense that materialism is not enough. Having 2 Mercedes is not enough. It's interesting, a big selling book a couple years ago was A Purpose-Filled Life. New York Times bestseller for months and months, and a bestseller in Canada. It's interesting, let me just tell you about coffee I had with 2 students at different times, former students. One is a 28-year-old MBA. She started talking about her life at a big company. And after about 10 minutes, I stopped her and said, "You sound like one of my middle-aged buddies I play hockey with. You sound like you're having a middle-age crisis already. You're 28. But she's saying, I want to have a sense of purpose. Another BCom student, he's about 27 now, quit a job at Bell, moved to Ethiopia for a year to help out in Africa as an IT person. What I see increasingly is young people saying, it's just not enough to pay the mortgage. What I want is a sense of purpose in what I'm doing. So in a law firm, it's about doing pro bono work more. It's about wanting to work with clients who have a sense of vitality. And I hear this increasingly from young people. So we have to think about how do we get that sense of purpose in our organizations. We have to rethink the meaning of career for young people particularly, but boomers are getting into this as well. I hear more of my boomer friends are, the other day we had 6 of us, 4 couples at dinner, and we got started talking about what if you won $1 million? Amazingly, we agreed in about 5 minutes it was not enough, that we actually needed 10. Then we said, now we're talking serious money. And all of them said they would quit work and do volunteer work. They all said, we want to get off the corporate treadmill and do volunteer work, or the teaching high school treadmill and do volunteer work. So I hear that refrain increasingly in society. What we're looking at is saying people want much more flexibility, on-ramps, off-ramps. And I've had many women lawyers tell me after given talks, they really appreciate it because what they want is to be able to work 60% of the time. Now they want to get paid 70, and I tell them maybe 50, maybe we've got a deal. But what they want is that sense of flexibility. And the amazing thing is, and this is really weird, that young men are taking paternity leaves. Increasingly, what is good for the gander is good for the goose. They're saying, why should my wife get to have a year off and I don't? Now, any of you women who've had children or you have husbands, we understand the woman is much more engaged. On the other hand, the idea of wanting to be a parent is a very good one. An engaged father strikes me. See, my wife gave birth and I went back to work right away. Now, probably my mother-in-law and my mother pushed me out of the house. And they felt I was not particularly useful at that point. But there was a sense of that you go back to work right now. Young men are taking time off. But to summarize, simply we look at the world as modern and postmodern. And there's some... So the thought is that anybody who's probably 35 or under views the world substantially different through the lens of postmodernism. And we talked about different views of hierarchy, different views of the word truth, different views of authority. And so we see some 5 practical ideas. That we look at the importance of stories, the importance of hearing many voices and not being the only voice that's speaking. This is really ironic, given I'm talking all the time.